Welcome to your Essential Business Briefing. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up, will the coronavirus do irreparable damage to Australia's international education industry? We'll hear from students who say they've been left behind by a sector worth over €20 billion a year. Who's investing during this crisis and in what? France's Ambassador for International Investment gives us his view of the landscape. And no dancing in the spotlight. We'll find out how France's nightclubs are coping with the prospect of staying closed for the foreseeable future. Now first this week to Australia, where the business of attracting international students is a major contributor to university funding and to the overall economy. But there are warnings that travel restrictions due to the coronavirus will cut numbers drastically. Meanwhile, many of the 500,000 foreign students already in the country have lost jobs during the crisis. Without access to government support, some are struggling to survive. From Sydney, our correspondents Rochelle Harrison and Gregory Pless sent this report.
Locked out amid a lockdown. Excluded from government assistance during the coronavirus crisis, many international students in Australia are turning to food banks and NGOs to survive.
I just think that we are just number for the country. We are not being keeping in mind as a humans, just as a number. So for me it was frustrating.
Australia is home to more than 500,000 international students. With widespread job losses, many are now struggling. Some are on the brink of homelessness. But places like this community centre in Sydney have thrown them a lifeline.
Since the pandemic, we have seen an enormous number of students coming to us because they're in absolute desperate need of the most basic of human rights, and that's food.
We got fresh vegetables and fruits and grapes. This is something that really make a change in these hard times.
Australia is the world's third most popular destination for studying abroad, and education the country's fourth biggest export. International students are big business. Each year they generate the equivalent of more than €23 billion for the economy. Their tuition fees add up to more than a quarter of university revenue. But that could all change if they feel the government has let them down.
Students really didn't need to be hearing that after paying significant fees, that in the end, when times are tough, that the Australian community doesn't welcome them.
The government is now considering opening so-called safe corridors to allow foreign students to return as the country scrambles to rescue one of its most lucrative industries.
The pandemic has put major business and investment decisions on hold almost everywhere. So as restrictions are lifted, what are the prospects for investing to pick up? Here in France, 2019 was a record year for international investment, up by 11%. But a recent survey by EY on France as an investment destination found that 2/3 of business leaders planned to reduce their investments in 2020. A further 23% said they plan to delay until next year, while 11% saw no change. To talk about this further, I'm joined now by Pascal Cagni, who's the French Ambassador for International Investment. Pascal, you have a good view of this landscape from many points of view, but I'm going to start from this idea that day-to-day business activity has plummeted during the lockdown. But what's been happening broadly in the investment landscape during this time?
No, you've got essentially two phenomena. First, investors have been very much looking at COVID as a kind of what he has as a cleansing effect on the investment and the number of startups which are essentially trying to raise money. And all investors have been looking much more carefully about the burning rate, which is essentially the level of expense, asking the company to basically review that. Now, the beauty of what we'll be doing in Europe, at the opposite of the US, we essentially offered through the state some guaranteed loan. We also ensure a serious level of liquidity. And with what we call the partial jobs or the furlough, we ensure that we didn't have the same level of unemployment and layoff all around the places. So that's really what happens. Now, the question is that what is next? And what is next is suddenly that you've got still some courageous investors willing to invest in the future, because we know that through the crisis of 2000s, the bubble internet burst that we had, as well as 2008 and 9, very often the winners are the ones which are investing counter-cycle. The great entrepreneur, the great technology are all here, and they are going to be even more critical in the post-COVID world.
Now, France in the past has worried investors with state intervention in certain areas. We know that the state's getting back involved in the private sector a lot more, you know, with rescue plans for Renault and Air France, among others. Is there a risk that this could damage France's image as a place to invest, given that it has been so successful recently in attracting international investment?
No, you're right. We should underline an amazing result, right? After 3 years of the current administrations, we basically reached a new record level, with France being, as per the EY reports of the Business France Bilan Invest reports, one of the highest or the most sought after destinations for investment, either into industrial investments, R&D, or even logistics. But clearly, there is somehow a comeback from the States. But that has been seen extremely positively by the investors that I'm talking to every day. In fact, the truth of the matter is they basically enjoy and support this when they are looking at the contrast with other economy where the state have been, if anything, absent. Now, we also have strong reinsurance by the current governments that they will not use the classical menu of tools, being either tax increase or being more regulations. Mr. Bruno Le Maire in France, our prime ministers talking to some key leaders of the FTSE 500 have been very clear about that. It's about finding when the states need to intervene and when you leave the private sectors doing its jobs. Now, for that, more than ever, we need a communion, a merge of interest. And we're all here to address an economy which is going to slow down dramatically, an unemployment which is going to be on the rise, and the fact that the real opportunity is still the demand. Remember that the savings have been to a record high, and we cannot wait the consumptions, right, to kick in so that we go back to some revenue level which are pre-COVID. That's really what is at stake.
Pascal, I'm going to ask you a question with a different hat on now. You're also the founder of the C4 Ventures Fund. You've announced 80 million in funding for the post-COVID world. Where is that money going now that you've chosen to invest at what is a very difficult time?
No, this money is going into 3 core subjects. What I will describe the never again. We don't want to be caught unaware by a new pandemic. So medtech, health tech, and supply chain will be core. The second subject will be about what I will describe as the stay home, related to a new social and professional habits, where typically we have to reinvent the way we do remote working. We get educated through EdTech, or we get also secure through a new range of technology and cybersecurity. And the third one is really about the core idea of making this world great again. And that's really about better food, decarbonized economy, as well as a change in the way we look at the impact, right? Impact investing. That's the 3 areas I think we should invest.
So how do you, as an investor, look at companies at a time like this? We're facing into a massive recession. You know, business has dried up in so many areas. What are you looking for when you're looking for startups to invest in?
I mean, our role, and I think we've got a social role in that as investors, is to make sure that first we give the capital to basically this company to succeed. Remember, the state have been essentially addressing the sanitary crisis. They've been ensuring some liquidity, and they essentially addressing or saving some jobs. The job of investors is to bring the capital to basically survive through the periods, which is certainly going to be a 12 to 18 months period. So that's the first the most important concept. Once you said that, we also look about the quality of the team we have and the ability to continue to do our research and developments and go to market. That's really the focus. Capital, addressing the burn rate, ensuring that we can go through the cycle in a good shape.
And has that changed during the pandemic? Are those not priorities you'd have at all times?
Big time. The focus on reducing the burn rate, the focus on the ability to bring or get closer to our revenue, the ability to create proper IP has been very strong. The good old idea of the hippies times, I think we just finished, where you could come with an idea, explain to your investors, oh, I'm going to write the codes, trying to get basically the right algorithm. That is gone. Now you need to be a lot more concrete, come with a minimal viable products or proof of concept, which is already live. That's really the big change.
And does that mean that for investors, there are opportunities in this crisis that may not be short term?
I'm sure of it. I have the privilege to have my gray hair, and this gray hair gone through the internet bubble burst of 2000s, as well as the crisis of 2008-9, and I learned there that if you invest counter-cycle, poaching the right entrepreneurs and the right idea, it actually could be very beneficial, both for the society as well as for the investors.
Okay, Pascal Cagni, founder of C4 Ventures, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Now, many of the restrictions imposed in France because of the COVID-19 pandemic have now been lifted. But nightclubs are one of the few businesses still prevented from reopening. That's a big challenge for operators who had already been facing shrinking margins before this crisis. Solange Mougin reports.
It's dark times on the dance floor. Despite many French lockdown measures being lifted, this nightclub still can't reopen.
On est complètement oublié en fait, au final, vu que tout le monde rouvre, notamment les salles de concert. Donc nous, on est comme une salle de concert et nous, on n'a pas le droit d'ouvrir.
The club has been closed for months. Losses already amount to 80,000 euros.
Depuis le mois de mars, on n'a que des prélèvements.
Even with government-backed loans, the club's finances are dwindling.
Si on n'a pas d'activité, de toute façon, ça sert à rien de continuer, quoi.
In the meantime, the owners are working on a plan for when they can reopen.
Alors effectivement, maintenant on a de la place pour danser.
T'as de la place pour danser, mais bon, la convivialité n'est plus là, quoi.
Another club, another strategy.
Alors là, on est en train de décharger les nouvelles tables qu'on vient d'acheter là pour s'adapter aux normes.
Tables and chairs will allow this disco to reopen as a simple bar.
Je vais soulever, tu vas tirer.
With, of course, the required 1 meter distance between each table.
En général, j'ai 50-60 personnes qui dansent. Aujourd'hui, je pense que je vais pouvoir mettre 12 personnes maximum.
No DJs and finishing up at 2 in the morning instead of at 7. Opening is a risky bet, but with 250,000 euros in losses already, the owner says it's the only way to stay afloat.
On va faire un tiers du chiffre d'affaires. Je vais reprendre à peu près un tiers de mon personnel aujourd'hui. On ne sait pas où on va, mais il faut absolument qu'on ouvre. Là, ça devient vital.
Many of France's 1,600 discos feel they've been forgotten by the government's aid packages. Union representatives say some 30% of clubs could permanently shut their doors in the coming months.
That's it from us for this week. Do get in touch on social media with your thoughts on the stories that we've been covering. Until next time, thanks for watching.